Welcome to this episode where we explore the rich tapestry of mythology and how it intertwines with our favorite science fiction narratives. Today we're diving deep into the connection between the actual House of Atreides from Greek mythology and the fictional House Atreides and Frank Herbert's iconic series Dune. The author of Dune, Frank Herbert, was born over a century ago in 1920 in Tacoma, Washington. He worked as a journalist. It was through this job that his fascination with ecology began and the ways human societies adapt to extreme environments, which became central to Dune. His novel Dune was published in 1965 and became a massive success. This book is significant for several reasons. Complex world building. Herbert created an intricate universe with detailed histories, cultures, and politics, influencing the science fiction genre profoundly. It has inspired countless works across various media, including films, games, and literature, which we're going to talk about later, establishing itself as a foundational text in sci-fi. Not to mention that recently, the names of planets from the Dune novels were adopted for actual places on Saturn's moon, Titan. It delves into power dynamics, imperialism, and the impact of messianic figures, and it features characters, especially Paul Atreides, the protagonist, that are faced with complex moral and ethical dilemmas, making them relatable and thought-provoking. To understand the House of Atreides, though, in Dune, we first need to explore their mythological roots, and that's what this podcast is all about. The surname comes from the Atreides family, Atreides, in Greek, who in mythology are the descendants of Atreus, the king of Mycenae in southern Greece. The sons of Atreus, Agamemnon, and Menelaus are central figures in the Trojan War story. That war would have happened roughly in 1200 BC. At the site of Mycenae, there's a building called Treasury of Atreus, or Tomb of Agamemnon. As you can see, the archaeologists are not really sure exactly as to what this really was and whom it was dedicated to. It's a large tomb constructed around 1400 BC, so we're talking about 3,400 years ago, and it was the biggest dome in the world for the next 1400 years. It's still standing, which is really impressive, so you can visit it. Its entrance was adorned with marble sculptures that have been plundered, of course, and they're scattered in several museums. We have some in Athens, obviously, and others are in London. Again, of course, they're in London, and in 3 cities in Germany, Berlin, Munich, and Karlsruhe. On top of its entrance, there's a block that weighs roughly 120 tons, the biggest one ever used in Greece, and one of the heaviest stones ever used. And because we're talking about heavy stones, keep in mind 120 tons is, of course, a lot of weight, but the largest stone ever moved in antiquity weighed 1,000 tons, and it was in Egypt. So let's get now to the very complicated, and when I say very complicated, I really mean it, origins of the Atreides family, so pay close attention. King Enomaus, near Olympia, in southern Greece, again, King Enomaus, was afraid of a prophecy that he would be killed by his son-in-law. That's why he had killed 18 suitors of his daughter Hippodamia after defeating them in a chariot race. By the way, this shows that the chariot races were a thing in Greece over 1,000 years before the stuff that we see in movies such as Ben-Hur or Gladiator and so on. But one day, a man called Pelops comes along and defeats Enomaus. In order to achieve that, though, he had help from the king's charioteer, Myrtilus, with whom he had made an agreement. But Pelops didn't keep his end of the bargain and threw Myrtilus off a cliff instead of rewarding him. With his dying breath, Myrtilus cursed Pelops. This is an amazing detail that has a great parallel in Dune, the thing with the last dying breath. This was the source of the curse that haunted descendants of Pelops. Eventually, to honor the memory of Enomaus, the king that Pelops had killed, Pelops started the Olympic Games, and his name the name of Pelops, was given to an entire peninsula of Greece below Athens, a region that includes places such as Corinth, Sparta, Nemea, Messini, Mycenae as well, and Kalamata. The region's name is Peloponnesos, Peloponnese, as you say in English, which means the island of Pelops. It's not an island, but that's a different story. I hope you didn't think that that was the end of the complicated story, because that was not that complicated. Did we even say who the father of Pelops was, to make things even worse? It was a king called Tantalus. He had cut his son into pieces, boiled him, and offered him to the 12 gods to test if they would know what he had done. Obviously, they did, and they brought the child back to life. That child was, of course, Pelops, who founded the Olympic Games, as we said, and Tantalus obviously got punished. He had to stand in a pool of water under a fruit tree. You can see here how the gods were very original, how bored they were, and they came up with really interesting punishments for the humans. So he had to stand in this pool of water under a fruit tree, and whenever he reached for the fruit, the branches raised so that he could never eat. Whenever he bent down to get a drink, the water receded so that he would always be thirsty. And isn't that now obviously the origin of the word tantalize? So that was the father of Pelops. What about his children now that really have the connection to Dune? Amongst them were the boys Atreides and Thyestes. Atreides, obviously we said the word Atreides in Dune come from that name. So we have the boys Atreides and Thyestes. Atreides had a complicated relationship with his brother Thyestes, to say the least, because Thyestes had seduced the wife of Atreides. No wonder it was complicated. This rivalry ended up in a very simple act of vengeance, which was Atreides invited Thyestes to a meal, pretending to reconcile, and served Thyestes his own sons. After eating, Thyestes was shown the severed heads of his children. Thyestes, of course, cursed his brother Atreides, and later, in another twist of fate, and this is where it gets even worse, Thyestes had a son with his own daughter. That son would later kill Atreides, continuing the cycle of vengeance between the two families. As you can see, there were a lot of chances for curses. This is some serious intricacy in these myths. Now we're getting to the sons of Atreides. It's always those damn boys causing all the problems. The sons of Atreides were Agamemnon and Menelaus. Agamemnon, the king of Mycenae, was the more prominent of the two, and he is known for leading the Greek forces in the Trojan War. The goddess Artemis demanded Agamemnon to sacrifice one of his daughters, Iphigenia, a decision that had great personal cost. This sacrifice set off a chain of more tragic events, leading to his eventual downfall. And now we're getting, finally, to the role of women in the Atreide legacy. A pivotal figure is Agamemnon's wife, Clytemnestra. In English, the name is pronounced Clytemnestra. Clytemnestra. Her rage over her daughter's sacrifice leads her to plot Agamemnon's murder upon his return to Greece from Troy. So keep in mind what we see in the movie Troy with Brad Pitt, that was made like 20 years ago. Agamemnon dies in Troy in the movie, but in reality, in the myth anyway, he comes back to Greece to be murdered by his wife. And you're going to see what this murder creates when he comes back to Greece. The ruins of their palace, by the way, we can still see in Mycenae, where there's also a tomb called the tomb of Clytemnestra, the wife of Agamemnon, the queen of Mycenae. Then, the murder of Agamemnon causes the wrath of his remaining daughter, Electra, who hates her mother and mourns her murdered father. Hence the Electra complex in psychology, which is the equivalent of the Oedipus complex, which is the boys loving their mothers too much. Electra complex is the daughter loving her father too much. Electra obviously will not just let this go unpunished, so a revenge is coming. Electra gets together with her long-lost brother Orestes. Of course there had to be a lost brother in all of this, because it wasn't very complicated. It will be he that will eventually murder the mother Clytemnestra. As Herbert writes in Dune, the father left his legacy of pride, pain, and duty in the hands of his son. The journey of Orestes raises profound questions about justice and morality. Is he justified in his actions, or is he merely continuing the cycle of violence that has plagued his family? The Furies will haunt him, and the gods themselves will put him to trial in Athens by the Acropolis. They will be torn, but eventually he will be acquitted. Let's get to the legacy of the Atreides family. The House of Atreides stands as a powerful symbol in Greek mythology, representing the intertwining of honor, duty, betrayal, and tragedy. Their stories remind us that our choices have lasting impacts, echoing through generations. Their story resonates through history, influencing literature, drama, and art. From ancient plays to modern interpretations, the family continues to serve as a cautionary tale about the cost of power and the weight of legacy. And actually, the first play that I ever played in after I finished school was an adaptation of Electra, the story where the daughter plots with her brother and they kill the mother. And of course, there's the connection with Dune. Frank Herbert's Dune draws on several mythological, historical, and religious traditions. In Dune, Herbert writes, "The Atreides, a family with bloodlines stretching back to the ancient Greeks of old Terra, Earth, held a name woven with history, honor, and strength. Descendants of Agamemnon and heroes from before memory, they carried in their veins the pride of conquerors, the wisdom of leaders. Duke Leto Atreides bore this legacy with a fierce commitment, inheriting the duty of those who came before him." So here are some connections with ancient Greece. Much like the mythical Atreides family, the House of Atreides is portrayed as noble leaders with a strong moral compass, yet they're trapped in political intrigue. By the way, Atreides in Greek is practically the singular. You say a person, a man is an Atreides. The plural would be Atreide. So practically in Dune, the name of the family is the singular. Just the detail, just so you know, because I keep saying Atreide and then I say Atreides. It's the same thing. One of the most striking parallels between the house of those Atreides families is their experiences with power and betrayal. In Greek mythology, Agamemnon's hybris, which means sin, leads to tragic consequences, including the sacrifice of his daughter Iphigenia. Just a silly detail over here to make another connection to another movie is that this was the name that was chosen by Robin Williams when he played Mrs. Doubtfire. He just chose this name like for the character. The character was, the surname of the character was Doubtfire, but her name was Iphigenia. And I think he pronounces this as Iphigenia or something. The irony is that unbeknownst to everyone, the goddess Artemis had saved the girl, Iphigenia. So she hadn't really been killed. This whole thing happened for nothing. Everything always happens for nothing, to be honest. Similarly, Duke Leto's decisions in Dune set off a chain of events that ultimately lead to his downfall and the treachery of House Harkonnen. Let's go to the heroic archetype. Paul Atreides, the protagonist of Dune, to use the word from Greek, protagonist, shares traits with heroes from Greek mythology, like Odysseus, who undergoes trials and gains wisdom through suffering. Paul embarks on a journey of self-discovery and evolves into a leader. Another fascinating aspect is the theme of destiny. In Dune, Paul Atreides is often seen as a messianic figure with a destiny intertwined with the fate of the planet Arrakis and its people. This resonates with the mythological notion of fate that looms over the Atreides family, where prophecies and curses dictate their paths. As we said in the very beginning, the king who killed the suitors of his daughter did so because of some prophecy. The Greek gods often controlled human fate, and characters like Oedipus and Achilles were destined for greatness, but also doomed by prophecy. Similarly, Orestes, the one who killed his own mother, was like a messianic figure who came to rectify the injustice and rescue his sister, Electra. I hope you are not very, very confused up to now. Keep in mind that in Greece, these are well-known stories. It doesn't mean that a person from Greece wouldn't get really confused by hearing all of those names. But anyway, we're kind of familiar with all of those things. So I honestly hope that you're not too confused with all of this. Then let's go to the name of the father of Paul Atreides, a duke called Leto in Greek. So the name Leto is likely a reference to the Greek titaness, so a female titan, who became pregnant by Zeus. She was hunted by Hera, the wife of Zeus, wandering in exile while carrying her children, the twin gods Apollo and Artemis. In Greek mythology, Leto represents resilience and endurance, which align closely with what the character of Duke Leto is about. Nevertheless, in Greek, it's a female-only name. It's even used as a name for, what is the name for that? Hospitals where women give birth. I'm not sure what you call that in English, but we have a word for that in Greek. Let's go to the son of Leto in Dune, Paul Atreides. After mentioning the mythical Leto and her son Apollo, I think that maybe the name Paul could be associated with Apollo. Paul Apollo, the god of prophecy, music, and healing. Could be. Paul's prescient abilities parallel Apollo's role as a god of prophecy. You have that connection there. And then we have godlike figures and Olympian parallels. The powerful figures in Dune, like the Bene Gesserit, function like the gods of Olympus who manipulate human affairs. The Bene Gesserit's breeding program in particular resembles the machinations of Greek gods who practically intervened in human genealogy and created heroic or divine offspring like Achilles and Hercules. So we have demigods, we have incredible heroes. This is the gods intervening in human genealogy. This is really impressive. And they're also like the oracles. The Bene Gesserit are also like the oracles of ancient Greece, with their ability to perceive future events and influence leaders. That was done, for example, by the oracle of Apollo. So you can see we have a lot of connections to Apollo and Artemis. Let's get to the desert and the underworld. The desert of Arrakis can be compared to Greek mythological landscapes like the barren, dangerous underworld or Tartarus. In Tartarus was where Tantalus was punished by the gods for cutting up his son Pelops. So the father who cut his son Pelops was punished in Tantalus. Sorry, I meant he was punished in Tartarus. So you can see that even I would get confused, especially with these two names, Tantalus and Tartarus, where they were really close. So Tantalus was punished for cutting up his son Pelops, and he pretty much started the curse of the House of Atreides. These locations in Greek mythology serve as settings for trials of endurance where heroes prove themselves, much as Paul does on the harsh planet of Arrakis. In conclusion, the House Atreides in Dune is a complex homage to the themes for the legendary House of Atreides in ancient Greece. Both explore power, betrayal, and destiny. The saga Dune itself is like the ancient Greek epics such as the Iliad and the Odyssey, really long, a lot of books as well, and they feature themes of heroism, struggle, and the quest for identity. Herbert also sought to create a universe with linguistic diversity, so he didn't draw inspiration only from ancient Greece. Using Arabic terms added to the feeling of a distant, future society where Earth's cultures had evolved and mixed, and not evolved. I will mention some of those Arabic connections briefly, and then we'll get to the Dune films. The desert planet of Arrakis and its inhabitants, the Fremen, or the Free Men actually, are heavily inspired by the Middle East cultures, especially Bedouin tribes. The name Arrakis could be of Arabic origin, but I'm not going to get into this. It doesn't really matter at this moment. And besides, for a lot of those things, we don't know exactly where Herbert really had in mind. The actual inspiration for the Dune saga, though, were the Oregon Dunes in the USA, and we'll get to this. Water, which is a precious resource on the desert planet, plays a crucial role, of course, in the novel, much like it does in real-life desert cultures. And let's not forget that it's a big deal also in the Mad Max movies, which come out a little bit later, over a decade later after Dune, and they have to do with the destruction of the environment by humans. The spice of the Dune universe is a substance highly sought after for its mind-expanding and life-extending properties. It definitely brings in mind substances like myrrh and frankincense, valued for their spiritual and medicinal properties by several Middle Eastern peoples, such as the ancient Egyptians, or they were presented as gifts at the birth of Jesus. And we have words like Shai Hulud for the sandworms, namely the thing of eternity. We have Muad'Dib, Paul's Fremen name, and we have Mahdi, which is a messianic figure, or we have the Fremen's belief in Paul as their Lisan al-Gaib, the voice from outer world. All of these things echo Islamic eschatology and messianic prophecies. By the way, parenthesis, because I said eschatology, I think it might be in my mind, or maybe you will think of the same thing. In Greek, eschatology comes from the word eschato. It has ch. Eschato means last, so it's about the end of days, let's say. The other word, which has to do with pub, in Greek is the word skata. It doesn't have e in the beginning, and it has s and k. Ska. The word for the end of days, eschatology, actually in Greece has ch, as I told you. But the sound ch from Greek became a k in English. That's why those two things sound similar in English. Just in case you thought of that, or if you hadn't, now you're thinking about it. And also, in Dune, Herbert introduces the idea of jihad in Arabic. Traditionally, it means struggle, often with a religious connotation. And then we have the name Shaddam for the emperor, which sounds like obviously the known name Saddam. It's not Shah, it's Sa for the actual name, as in Saddam Hussein. It can be interpreted as one who confronts or one who stands firm. So the use of non-Western languages, especially Arabic, helped to make the Dune universe feel both familiar and alien, adding depth to its futuristic setting. Nevertheless, we find also Latin words such as Imperium, so there's this familiarity or connection even to the Roman Empire in a way, and there's even a character called Duncan Idaho, which for me was the funniest thing. And let's get to the films now. In 1984, David Lynch directed his film starring Kyle MacLachlan as Paul Atreides in his debut. It was actually made during Frank Herbert's lifetime, who died in 1986. So the author died 2 years after the film. The film didn't do that well in the box office nevertheless, but it developed a cult following. In 2000, when I was 15, John Harrison made Frank Herbert's Dune a miniseries. A sequel miniseries titled Frank Herbert's Children of Dune was released in 2003, adapting Herbert's second and third novels. And in 2021, Denis Villeneuve directed Dune, while this year in 2024, because now I'm recording this in November 2024, Dune Part 2 was released, completing the adaptation of the 1965 novel, the first novel. These films star Timothée Chalamet as Paul. So French name both for the director and for the main actor. The 2021 film grossed over $400 million against a budget of $165, whereas Part 2 grossed over $700 million with a budget of $190 million. These numbers are mind-blowing. The first part won several awards. It won 6 Academy Awards, 6 Oscars out of 10 nominations, including cinematography, production design, costume design, visual effects, film editing, and Best Original Score. It won the Golden Globe for Best Motion Picture Drama, and it won 5 BAFTA awards. The nominations for 2025 have not yet been announced, but the second Dune is projected to have almost the same number of nominations as the first one, but not for the soundtrack, because it was considered that Hans Zimmer used a lot of the same music that he used for the first movie. So here are some fun and interesting facts about the movie Dune. Villeneuve had wanted to make Dune since he was a teenager. He had first read the novel when he was 14 and dreamed of adapting it for decades. His passion for the project shows in this movie's meticulous attention to detail and respect for the source material. To capture the vast, harsh landscapes of the desert planet Arrakis, much of the movie was filmed in real deserts in Jordan and Abu Dhabi. It would have been, but I obviously guess there were reasons why they didn't do it. It would have been really interesting if they had filmed at the actual dunes that inspired the whole saga. The heat in Jordan and Abu Dhabi was so intense that some crew members' shoes would melt during filming. I've totally been there. My shoes did not melt, obviously, but I mean in those conditions. When, for example, in 2024, few months ago, I filmed a short film in Athens during the hottest time of the year. I'm obviously just trying to tell you that I do movies as well. Hans Zimmer, a fan of the Dune novel, created an original, otherworldly score for the film using experimental instruments. He even turned down the opportunity to work on Tenet with his frequent collaborator Christopher Nolan so that he could focus on Dune. He was right. It was a well-deserved victory at the Oscars. Then we get to the massive sandworms that play a central role in the Dune universe. To make the sand interact realistically with the sandworms' movements, the crew created custom sand mixtures, blending different types of sand grains to achieve the right look and feel for the worms. That is some crazy stuff that film crew creates. Then we get to Stellan Skarsgård. Stellan Skarsgård played the villainous Baron Harkonnen, and he spent about 8 hours in makeup each day to transform into that enormous, grotesque character. The final result was a combination of practical effects and CGI, creating a very interesting villain and a compelling performance which deserved some recognition, but unfortunately it didn't happen. The soldiers now of House Harkonnen, the Sardaukar, they speak a guttural, alien-sounding language in the film. This language was actually created by a linguistics expert specifically for Dune, adding to the film's world building. That's what we talked about earlier, a lot of detail. Villeneuve wanted the Sardaukar to sound like they came from a completely different culture. That is some extreme work just for a film, to create a language just for the movie. Then we have the ornithopters. Those flying vehicles that we see in the movie, they were designed to resemble dragonflies. The word ornithopter comes from the Greek words for bird, ornitha, and wing, ptero, ornithopter, as in helicopter. And then we go to, finally, the fact that these two movies, as we said, cover Herbert's first novel, but the director has also expressed hope for adapting Dune Messiah in the future, which would continue Paul's story. In closing, by linking Paul Atreides to the mythological family from Greece, Herbert added a sense of historical weight and importance to his Atreides lineage, suggesting that their destiny, like that of their Greek namesakes, is both heroic and tragic. It took Herbert 6 years of research, and the book was turned down by almost 20 publishers. Over the course of 2 decades, he wrote 6 books about the Dune universe. Even so, he wasn't done. He was planning a 7th one to conclude the saga, but he died in 1986. His son Brian became an author and continues to expand the Dune universe, and he has co-written prequels, sequels, and spin-offs inspired by his father's notes. Dune is the best-selling science fiction novel of all time. Thank you for joining me on this episode that intertwined myth and sci-fi. If you enjoyed our exploration of the Atreides connection, be sure to subscribe and leave me a review. I'd like to hear your thoughts on what we talked about and also suggestions about other episodes.